I've seen just about every flavor of foolishness walk into my courtroom, but that morning when I took my seat and looked down at the docket, I had a feeling I was about to be served a 3-course meal of nonsense with a side of delusion. And let me tell you, I was right. The plaintiff, a young woman named Claire, sat stiff as a broom handle on the left side of the courtroom, hands clenched, jaw tight, the kind of posture that tells me someone's been stewing on injustice long enough to boil pasta. On the right sat her ex-boyfriend, Darren, sunglasses on his head inside, shirt too shiny, smile too wide. The sort of smile men wear when they think they're charming but are in fact 2 steps from embarrassing themselves publicly. And he was about to sprint those 2 steps. I picked up the file and scanned it. Allegation: defendant stole $3,000 from plaintiff's bank account. Defendant claims the money was a gift. Oh, wonderful. Another episode of men who think reality bends for them. I looked at Claire first. Ma'am, I said, you're suing for $3,000 you say he took without your permission. Is that correct? She nodded quickly. Yes, Your Honor. And I cut in, he claims it was a gift. I'm sure you've read his answer, because I certainly have, and it reads like someone trying to lie while using a crayon. Behind me, I heard a soft chuckle from the audience. I shot a look over my glasses. This wasn't a comedy club. Well, it wasn't supposed to be. But with defendants like Darren, sometimes it becomes one by accident. All right, I said, leaning back. Let's get to the meat of this sandwich. Claire, tell me what happened. She inhaled a shaky breath. We were dating for about 10 months. Things were rocky at the end. He had money issues. Stop, I held up a hand. When you say money issues, do you mean temporary financial hardship, or do you mean grown man waiting for someone else to foot the bill for his lifestyle? Her eyes shifted to Darren. The second one. Thought so. I turned. Mr. Darren, anything you want to say before she continues? He straightened his necklace gold, but the kind that turns your neck green in the rain. Judge, I just want to say that I love Claire, always will, and I would never steal from her. That money was a gift. She knew what she was doing. I held up the file. You call this a gift, a transfer she didn't know happened until she checked her statement. I squinted. Did Cupid shoot you in the head instead of the heart? He blinked. It was like an unspoken gift. There it was. The line that told me exactly what kind of case this would be, the kind where the defendant believes his fantasy world is legally binding. Back to Claire. Continue. Well, she said he had access to my debit card sometimes for emergencies, like groceries or gas, but I never told him he could take money. One morning I woke up and $3,000 was gone. Just evaporated, I asked dryly. She almost laughed. No. Transferred to his account. And what was your first clue that he was the one who did it? I asked. She pointed. He texted me a screenshot of something he bought, a gaming setup that cost nearly exactly $3,000. I turned to Darren. Sir, is this true? He shrugged. I mean, yeah, but she'd been telling me for months that she wanted to support my dreams. I'm trying to build a streaming career. A streaming career. I tapped the bench. Let me guess, 0 followers, 0 revenue, and 0 understanding of how numbers work. He bristled. I'm working on it. I'm sure you are, I said. But until you're working on it turns into earning money, you don't get to siphon off your girlfriend's account like she's your personal bank. He opened his mouth, but I bulldozed right through. Let me make one thing clear. A gift is voluntary. Someone saying, here, honey, take this money. I want you to have it. What happened here was not a gift. It was a withdrawal by you without permission. That's not a gift. That's called theft with glitter on it. Claire looked relieved, but she wasn't off the hook yet. I needed the full story. After you discovered the money missing, I said, what did you do? I confronted him, she said. He said it was for his future, that I should be happy to invest in him. Oh, please, I muttered. Even Wall Street won't invest in a business with no product and no plan, but you think your relationship counts as collateral? He raised a finger as if he had something wise to say. He didn't. Your Honor, couples help each other. Yes, I said they do. But you two aren't a couple anymore, and even if you were helping doesn't mean draining someone's account because your ego needs a new video game chair with lumbar support. Claire exhaled shakily. He refused to return the money. That's why I'm here. And she told me she wasn't ready to support me emotionally, Darren snapped. Money was her way of showing commitment. I stared at him. No, sir. Money was your way of showing that you believe entitlement is a personality trait. The audience murmured. I held up my hand again. Quiet. I flipped a page. Tell me about this gift theory of yours. When exactly did she say, darling, here's $3,000, go buy yourself a toy? Well, he said slowly, she said she believed in me. In what context? He hesitated. We were having an argument, and she said she hoped I would get my life together. That, I said, is not an invitation to withdraw funds. That's a polite way of saying stop being a burden. Even Claire looked surprised. I said it out loud. But I say what needs saying. I turned back to Darren, who now looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him. Here's the problem, sir. You took money that wasn't yours. You used it. You justified it with a fantasy you invented. And worst of all, you're sitting in my courtroom trying to convince me that fiction is legally binding. He opened his mouth. I shut it with a gesture. No, I've heard enough. Sit there and think about how lucky you are that the plaintiff isn't the type to press criminal charges. We're dealing strictly civil here, and you're already losing. But the story wasn't done. Not even close. Claire, I said, before I issue anything, tell me one thing. Why on earth did you stay with him for 10 months? She went silent. Darren looked smug. I raised a brow. Go on. I don't bite. She swallowed. Because I thought I could help him become better. I nodded slowly. Most women think that at least once. The key is learning that raising a grown man is not community service. Darren glared. That's unfair. Sir, what's unfair is stealing $3,000 from someone who cared about you and then calling it a gift. Nothing I've said comes close. I felt the tension rise like a pot ready to boil over. Perfect. That meant the truth was close, and I was getting ready to make him swallow every delusion he walked in with. I could feel the room tightening around Darren like a noose made purely of logic, the kind of thing defendants like him fear most. Logic is undefeated in my courtroom, and I was about to make him its next casualty. Let's get something straight, I said, placing my hands on the bench. You didn't ask. You didn't discuss. You didn't even leave a note. You simply helped yourself to $3,000. It wasn't like that, he blurted. Oh, I tilted my head. Then please enlighten me. What was it like? Did the money sprout legs walk over to your account and tuck itself in for the night? Somewhere behind him, a woman snorted. He turned offended as if the world owed him a tranquil environment to defend his bad decisions. Your Honor, he said, trying to sound reasonable. When you're in a relationship, you share things. You share responsibilities. You share dreams. Dreams, I repeated. Not bank pins. She gave me her card. Yes, I said, for groceries, gas, emergencies, not a deluxe neon gaming throne with cup holders and LED mood lighting. He looked annoyed that I knew the details. Defendants often forget that I actually read the cases before they waltz into my courtroom with their imaginary narratives. Claire piped up timidly. He said he needed food that day, so I thought. I stopped her. Ma'am, you don't have to explain his behavior. That's his full-time job, and he's currently failing the performance review. The audience erupted in laughter again, but this time I let it go. A little public amusement never hurt anyone, except maybe Darren, whose face flushed the color of a cheap sunburn. Let's establish something, I continued. $3,000 is not lunch money. It is not gas money. It is not, oops, I forgot to tell you. It is a significant withdrawal that requires discussion between two functioning adults. Darren muttered, I didn't think it would be a big deal. I felt my jaw tighten. Sir? If you ever want to know whether something is a big deal, here's a tip. If it could pay someone's rent for a month, it's a big deal. He crossed his arms, the universal sign of a man who thinks pouting equates to argumentation. I turned to Claire. Tell me what his reaction was when you confronted him. She sighed. He said, and these were his exact words, that investing in him was investing in our future. I almost applauded. That level of audacity takes commitment. And did he promise to pay you back, I asked? Yes, at first. Then he said he didn't owe me because gifts aren't refundable. I shifted toward Darren. Sir, what exactly made you think this was a gift? He shrugged with misplaced confidence. She told me she loved me. That, I said slowly, is not legal tender. He opened his mouth, but I kept going because, quite frankly, I was tired of watching him dig a hole deeper than the one he crawled in with. People say, I love you in relationships. It doesn't translate to, here's my financial identity, take what you want. If it did, U.S. banks would need emotional support departments. The gallery chuckled again. I leaned forward. Let's do something revolutionary, use facts. Claire, did you ever say he could take $3,000? No, Your Honor. Did you ever hint at it? No. Did you ever say anything even remotely close to, if you ever want to drain my account for a video game setup, feel free? Absolutely not. I looked at Darren. Well, anything to add? He lifted his chin. I thought she'd understand. That is not a defense, I said. That's wishful thinking wrapped in entitlement and sprinkled with delusion. He gripped the podium. Relationships are about trust. And yet, I replied, you've demonstrated none of it. Trust is not taking someone's debit card and turning yourself into a financial tornado. Claire's shoulders relaxed, but I wasn't done. Not even close. Let's talk timeline, I said. This withdrawal happened after the two of you had a fight. Yes, Claire confirmed. A big one? She nodded. We argued because he refused to get a real job. I told him he needed to start contributing to the bills. I turned to Darren. And your response to that conversation was to withdraw $3,000 from the person asking you to step up. I told you, he said, I needed to invest in my career, then get a job and use your paycheck, I snapped. This is the real world, not a wish-granting factory. He shifted uncomfortably, and I could tell his confidence was evaporating faster than his financial literacy. Let me tell you what I think happened, I said. You were upset. You felt insecure because your girlfriend was asking you to grow up. Instead of doing that, you decided to prove she believed in you by unilaterally deciding her money was now your money. He didn't deny it. That told me everything. Claire, I continued what happened after you discovered the charge. I told him I wanted to break up, she said quietly. He begged me to stay. Then he said the money made us even. Even, I echoed. For what? For the emotional support I didn't give him. I closed my eyes for a long moment. Let me get this straight. He believed you owed him $3,000 because you didn't comfort him enough. I guess. I turned to Darren, stunned, and I'm not a woman who gets stunned often. Sir, I have met narcissists. I have met manipulators. I have met people who think gravity is optional when it comes to them. But this is a whole new flavor of ridiculous. He stammered. It made sense at the time. Did it, I asked. Which part? The emotional compensation package, the unauthorized withdrawal, or the part where you thought bringing this fantasy to my courtroom was a wise decision? He looked at the floor. Mr. Darren, I said, you are not a misunderstood visionary. You are not a tortured artist. You are not an entrepreneur waiting to bloom. What you are is a grown adult who made an unjustifiable, indefensible choice and is now scrambling to make it sound noble. He swallowed hard. Now, I said we're going to address the last part of this disaster. Claire, did he ever return any of the money? She shook her head. No. Did he attempt to? No. Of course he didn't. All right, I said, I'm ready to rule. But Darren lifted his hand. Wait. I have proof it was a gift. I paused. This should be good. Show me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded, crumpled piece of notebook paper. I already knew it wouldn't help him, but I braced myself for whatever fresh nonsense he was about to unleash. It's a note she wrote me, he said proudly, as if he were presenting the Magna Carta. It proves everything. I opened it. It said, I hope you find something that makes you happy one day. Claire. I stared at him. Sir, this is not a permission slip to rob her. She meant it, he insisted. She meant it emotionally, I said. Not financially. He deflated like a cheap air mattress. And even if she had written, here's $3,000, it still wouldn't matter unless the money was actually given voluntarily. Which it was not. You took it. End of story. I let the silence drag for a moment, long enough for the truth to settle into every corner of the courtroom. Because the climax was coming and Darren wasn't ready. I folded the pathetic little note and handed it back to him the way you'd return a child's drawing that accidentally made it into your tax documents. Sir, I said, if you're building your entire legal defense on vague inspirational stationery, I'm afraid your case has the structural integrity of wet cardboard. He shoved the note into his pocket, clearly insulted. Good. Maybe insult would shake loose a few brain cells. I leaned back, studying him. Let me tell you something I've learned after decades of listening to stories just like yours. When someone takes money that isn't theirs, they always think they have a reason, a dream, a need, a justification. But reasons don't magically turn theft into generosity. He started to protest, but I cut him off. No, you've had more than enough airtime. It's Claire's turn now. I looked at her. Did he ever apologize genuinely? She hesitated. He said he was sorry. I was upset. I raised a brow. That is not an apology. That is a man trying to wash his hands in a puddle. Darren rolled his eyes. I tried my best. Your best, I repeated. Your best was stealing $3,000 and buying a Game of Thrones so you could sit comfortably while avoiding employment. If that's your best, sir, I'd hate to see your worst. He stared at the floor again. I've seen thousands of defendants do that, looking down, hunting for dignity like it might be hiding under their shoes. I pressed on. Claire, after he refused to return the money, what happened next? She sighed. He moved out. But he left me a message saying he hoped I wouldn't take him to court because it would hurt his brand. I blinked. Your brand? Darren lifted his chin again. I'm building an online persona based on what I asked. Dishonesty and borrowed furniture. He opened his mouth, but I cut him off with a hand. Don't answer that. I don't need the headache. Claire continued quietly. He told his friends that I donated the money to help him become a full-time streamer. And did his friends believe that? I asked. She glanced sideways. Some did. I nodded. People will believe anything if it saves them from confronting stupidity. Then I turned to Darren. Sir, let me ask you a question, and I want you to answer it honestly for once. Before you withdrew that $3,000, did you ever ask Claire for it? He hesitated. No. Did you hint? No. Did you even consider asking? He paused longer this time. I didn't think I needed to. There I said, tapping the bench. That's the problem. You think relationships make you entitled to things without effort, without discussion, without boundaries. You confuse affection with ownership. He bristled. I contributed emotionally. I stared at him. Sir, emotional contribution doesn't entitle you to raid someone's bank account. If it did, therapists would charge admission to their wallets. The audience laughed again, and this time I didn't bother to silence them. Darren needed to hear the echo of reality bouncing off every wall. I leaned forward. Now, let's talk about the so-called investment. Did you ever earn a single dollar from this streaming endeavor? I was just getting started. That is not an answer. Have you made any money? No. You have any sponsors? No. Followers? He perked up. 22. I blinked. 22. Sir, that is barely enough people to fill the waiting room at the DMV. He slumped. And what exactly did you buy with Claire's money? He straightened defensively. A high-end monitor, a premium gaming chair, a ring light, a new microphone, and a graphics card. I gave him a long, slow stare. So what you're telling me is not 1 cent went toward an actual need. Nothing that would feed you, shelter you, or improve your real life. You spent every dollar on accessories for a fantasy. It's not a fantasy, he insisted weakly. It's my passion. Passion, I said, is what you pursue after you pay your bills, not instead of paying them. Adults understand this. Children learn it quickly. You appear to be the only exception. He pressed his lips together. Good. Silence is a step forward. I turned to Claire again. When he moved out, did he take the equipment with him? Yes, Your Honor. Everything he bought, he took. So, I said, summarizing, he stole $3,000, purchased luxury items, kept them, refused to return the money, and insisted it was a gift. That's right. I nodded, just making sure we're all living in the same reality. Then, like clockwork, Darren decided to speak at the worst possible time. I didn't steal. I withdrew funds that were available to me. Available to you. I repeated slowly, in the same way a car is available to a valet temporarily, conditionally, and definitely not for personal errands. He scowled, She trusted me with her card. No, sir. She trusted you to act like a responsible human being, not a raccoon with access to a vending machine. The gallery roared. I allowed myself the faintest smile. Well-timed truth tends to have comedic side effects. Let me explain something I said. Access is not ownership. Permission is not permanent. And trust is not a debit card that refills itself every time you have an identity crisis. He shifted, clearly uncomfortable with the fact that the truth wasn't bending in his direction. I continued, Tell me, Darren, if she had taken $3,000 from your account without asking, what would you call it? He hesitated. Different situation. Oh, really? Why? Because you're the one who wanted the money. Because your dream chair was calling your name from the online cart. He remained silent. That's what I thought. Claire watched quietly, the exhaustion of 10 months of emotional labor settling across her shoulders like a coat she was finally ready to take off. I softened my tone slightly, not much, just enough to acknowledge her humanity amid the defendant's circus. Claire, why didn't you cancel the card earlier? Before it got to this point, she swallowed. I didn't want to make him feel distrusted. There is a difference, I said, between trust and neglecting common sense. You weren't protecting his feelings, you were delaying the inevitable. She nodded slowly. It was the look of someone finally understanding that protecting someone else's comfort had cost her far too much. I scanned Darren again. Now, sir, final question before I rule. Do you have any proof, text messages, emails, witnesses that she ever indicated this money was a gift? He shook his head. No. I thought so. Then he did the thing defendants do right before I flattened their entire delusional narrative. He doubled down. But she should have known, he insisted, she knew what I was trying to do with my life. Sir, I said, she is not a mind reader, nor is she your mother, your bank, or your sponsor. He looked stunned, as if no one in his life had ever told him the truth directly. Shocking. And let me be perfectly clear, I said. A relationship does not entitle one party to unilaterally take money from the other. Ever. Not married, not dating, not engaged, not spiritually aligned. Ever. I could see the climax forming, the tension tightening, the truth rising to the surface like a bubble ready to burst. Mr. Darren, I said, lowering my voice, you didn't just take money. You took advantage of someone who believed in you. You exploited affection. You weaponized trust. And then you had the nerve to walk into my courtroom and call it a gift. His shoulders sagged. You're lucky, I added, that I'm not a criminal court, because gifts don't come with bank statements marked unauthorized withdrawal. And that's when he finally broke. The moment every Judge Judy case eventually reaches the crack in the defendant's armor, he whispered, barely audible, I just didn't want to lose her. There it was. The truth, ugly, vulnerable, and far too late. When he whispered that pathetic line, I just didn't want to lose her, the entire room sank into a kind of hush. Not sympathy, not pity. Just a collective understanding that the truth had finally crawled out from whatever dark corner he'd been hiding it in. I leaned forward. Sir, you didn't want to lose her. So your solution, the part where your brain should have stepped in and said, don't do this, was to take $3,000 from her bank account. He swallowed hard. I thought, if I showed her I was committed, I repeated, absolutely incredulous. By draining her money, that's not commitment. That's financial hostage-taking. He looked hurt by my accuracy. Not my problem. I continued, let me explain something that apparently no one in your life has had the courage or the spine to tell you. You cannot make someone stay with you by putting them in debt. He winced. Good. Reality tends to sting before it sets you straight. I shifted toward Claire. Ma'am, did you tell him you were thinking of ending the relationship before this happened? She nodded. Yes, we'd had a serious conversation about it the week before. And after that conversation, I said you trusted him with your card again. I was trying to keep the peace. I nodded. I understand. But relationships aren't peace treaties. When someone shows you they're unstable, you don't hand them access to your finances. She exhaled, the guilt heavy in her chest. I could see it. Women often internalize responsibility for men who have none for themselves. I pointed at her gently. This isn't your fault, but don't ever give someone resources they haven't earned and don't know how to respect. Then I turned back to Darren. His posture had changed, shoulders drooped, ego deflated. He looked like a man realizing the story he told himself wasn't remotely lined up with the facts. "Sir," I said, "do you understand why you're here? Because you crossed a boundary so clearly defined, so obviously marked, that only someone drowning in denial could pretend not to see it." He rubbed the back of his neck. I wanted her to see I was serious about my future." I nodded. "If you want someone to believe in your future, start by having one that exists outside of fantasy land." The gallery murmured approval. Even Claire seemed to appreciate the precision. I tapped my pen. "Let's address the psychology of this disaster. You felt insecure about the relationship ending. Instead of improving yourself or taking responsibility, you grabbed the closest lifeline you could find, her money, and convinced yourself it was love." He looked away. "That's not love," I said. "That's dependency dressed up in delusion." He breathed shakily. "I don't enjoy watching grown adults crumble, but sometimes that's the only path to the truth." I continued, "Tell me, sir, when you made that withdrawal, did you imagine she'd be impressed?" He didn't respond. "Did you imagine she'd say, 'Wow, look at this ambition. Who cares that he violated my privacy and my trust?'" Still nothing. I pressed harder. "Or did you simply assume she wouldn't leave because she couldn't afford to?" His head jerked up. "No, I would never." "That's enough," I snapped. "Whether you intended it or not, that's what your actions communicated." Claire's face softened, not with forgiveness, but with clarity. She finally understood she hadn't been irrational or overreacting. She'd been manipulated. I turned to her. "Ma'am, did you ever feel guilty for wanting to leave him?" "Yes," she whispered. "Good. Stop. Right now. Because the guilt you felt was engineered by someone who wanted you to question yourself instead of questioning him." Her eyes brimmed with emotion, but she nodded. I looked back at Darren. "You took money because you feared she'd walk away, but what you actually did was guarantee it." He looked like he'd swallowed a brick. "Your Honor," he said softly, "I really did care about her." "Maybe you did," I said. "But caring about someone doesn't give you permission to harm them. Children understand this better than some adults." He dropped his gaze. And then, like clockwork, his defensiveness kicked back in. "She never understood how hard things were for me." "There it is," I said. "The return of the self-pity tour." He blinked. "I'm not pitying myself." "Yes, you are. Every sentence you've spoken today has included an invisible subtitle that says, 'Feel sorry for me.' I'm not in the business of validating stories built on excuses." His jaw tensed. I was trying my best. "No," I corrected. "You were trying your easiest. There's a difference." He froze. I continued sharply. "Adults who are actually trying their best take responsibility, get jobs, communicate, and respect boundaries. Adults who are trying their easiest take shortcuts, avoid accountability, and label theft as romance." The audience murmured in agreement. He opened his mouth to defend himself again, but I lifted one finger, the international signal for "don't even try it." "Sir, understand this. You don't get credit for meaning well when your actions cause real harm. Intent without responsibility is useless." He lowered his head. I turned to Claire again. "When he told you the money made you, even emotionally, what did you think?" She looked exhausted by the memory. "I thought he was trying to guilt me into staying." "He wasn't trying," I said. "He was doing it successfully for a while." She nodded slowly. I leaned back, studying both parties. This case wasn't just about money. It never is. Money is only the symptom. The disease is the imbalance. Emotional, psychological, sometimes moral. I cleared my throat. "Here's what concerns me most. Sir, you didn't simply take the money. You justified it. You built a narrative around it, then convinced yourself it was legitimate. He didn't deny it." "That is dangerous thinking," I added, "because if you can rationalize this, what else might you rationalize in your next relationship?" That question hung in the air like a warning flare. "Your Honor," Claire said softly, "I just want the money back. I'm not here to ruin his life." I nodded. "And that's exactly why you're going to be fine after this, because you're operating from reason, not revenge." Then I turned to Darren. "And you, sir, are lucky she is more gracious than you deserve." He stiffened. "But grace doesn't erase debt, and it doesn't rewrite facts." He looked like a man bracing for impact. "Let me spell it out, sir. You had no right, none, to that money. A relationship is not a blank check. Love is not a withdrawal authorization, and heartbreak does not entitle you to commit financial betrayal. He swallowed hard. You say you didn't want to lose her, but when you steal from someone you love, you don't lose them. You push them out the door yourself and then blame the wind. He closed his eyes, a quiet internal collapse. Good. Sometimes justice requires a clean break. I rested my hands on the bench, and now we settle this mess. Just as I was about to deliver the ruling, Darren lifted his head. Can't we settle this privately without making it official? I stared at him. Sir, you are in my courtroom? That ship has sailed, sunk, and been eaten by sharks. The audience burst into laughter, but I wasn't amused because the next part was the most important. Claire, I said, you're going to get your money. And then I turned to Darren, with finality sharpening every syllable. And sir, you're about to learn that delusion may comfort you, but it won't protect you. The room tightened the way it always does when the verdict is hanging in the air, waiting for gravity to do its work. Darren looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. Claire looked like she was finally breathing air that belonged to her again. And me, I was ready to wrap this case with the neatness of a legal guillotine. Sir, I said, leaning forward just enough to remind him that his excuses had officially expired. You walked into this courtroom believing you could spin a story about generosity, emotional confusion, and your future career into something resembling justification. He shifted his weight, but what you actually did was confess out loud repeatedly that you helped yourself to money that wasn't yours because you hoped it would glue a broken relationship back together. He winced. Love is not glue, and you don't fix a cracked vase by throwing someone else's wallet into it. A woman in the audience whispered, Amen. I didn't disagree. I continued, let's go step by step so we're all living in the same reality. Before this ruling lands, I ticked off points with my finger. 1, you took her card for what she believed were emergencies only. 2, you withdrew $3,000 without permission. 3, you spent it entirely on non-essential luxuries. 4, you refused to return the money. 5, you made up a fantasy where that was somehow a romantic gesture. I lowered my hand. Do you disagree with anything I just listed? He shook his head, barely. Good, I said, because I don't have the patience to argue with someone who wants to debate gravity. He sighed a defeated, sagging sound, the kind that comes from a man realizing the only person he'd been persuading was himself. I turned to Claire. Ma'am, before I finalize anything, is there anything else you want to say? She hesitated. Then, to my surprise, she said, I just wish he'd understood how hard I worked for that money. Darren's expression cracked guilt, leaking through the surface. But it was too late for revelations. I nodded. Your work ethic does not need to be validated by someone who demonstrated none of his own. Then I turned once more to the defendant. Sir, this is the part where most people in your situation try to apologize. And if you're planning to attempt it, this is your only chance. He looked at Claire, really looked at her, maybe for the first time, without the protective filter of his own needs. I'm sorry, he murmured. I really am. But then he ruined it, as people like him often do, by adding, I just wish you could have understood where I was coming from. I exhaled sharply, and there it is. The apology coupon valid only until the excuse prints out behind it. Sir, an apology with a justification is a manipulation wearing cheap cologne. He shut his mouth. Now, I said, straightening the papers before me, we're finished. I lifted my chin for the final blow. Judgment for the plaintiff in the amount of $3,000. Full repayment. No discounts, no deductions, no emotional coupons. Darren flinched. And, sir, I added before he could even open his mouth, you will not frame this ruling as an injustice on your social media, your streaming channels, or your brand. What happened here today wasn't a tragedy, it was accountability. His face twisted. But it'll make me look bad. Sir, I said, your actions made you look bad. I simply turned on the lights. The gallery let out a collective hum of satisfaction. I wasn't finished. Let me educate you on something you clearly skipped in adulthood. Relationships require contribution, not extraction. Trust is earned, not exploited. And when you violate someone's financial boundaries, you don't get to hide behind emotions like a child hiding behind the sofa. He stared at the bench, cheeks burning with humiliation. Consider this ruling an overdue reality check, I added. One you should have received long before you found your way into my courtroom. I turned to Claire. Ma'am, you'll receive the full amount. Case closed. She exhaled relief, washing through her like a release valve, finally opening after months of pressure. But I wasn't done with him, not until the lesson sealed shut. And sir, I said, take your gaming chair and your neon toys and do whatever you want with them, but never again at someone else's expense. He nodded weakly. I banged the gavel, and just like that it was over. Mostly. Because the part nobody ever sees, the part after the ruling is the moment people leave my courtroom carrying the weight of what just happened. Claire approached the exit with her shoulders lighter than when she'd walked in. There was still sadness there, a sadness born from wasted time, misplaced hope, and the emotional bruises left behind by someone she tried to lift higher than he was willing to climb. But beneath that sadness, I saw something stronger resolve, the kind that comes only after you've confronted truth and survived it. Darren, on the other hand, walked like a man who'd been cracked open and had no idea how to put himself back together. And frankly, that wasn't my concern. My courtroom isn't a therapy office. I don't hand out healing. I hand out clarity, and clarity can feel like a slap when you've been living in denial. As he reached the door, he glanced back at Claire, at me, at the room, maybe hoping someone would validate his narrative, maybe hoping someone would say he wasn't as wrong as he knew he was. No one did. He left with nothing but the truth trailing behind him like an unwelcome shadow. When they were gone, I gathered my paperwork, stood, and pushed my chair in. Another case closed. Another day of human chaos sorted into neat legal lines. Another example of someone mistaking affection for open access and learning the hard way that Judge Judy does not entertain fantasy law. As I walked out of the courtroom, one of the clerks whispered, "That was a brutal one." I shook my head. No, that was an educational one. Because here's the thing nobody ever wants to hear. Justice isn't just about money. It's about teaching people who refuse to learn from their mistakes that the bill always eventually comes due. And today, that bill was $3,000. He'll survive. Claire will recover. And me, I'll be right back tomorrow, ready for the next person who thinks the law bends to their feelings. It doesn't, not in my courtroom.